Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen from India. Good morning to our friends in Europe, and late in the evening for our friends in Australia and Singapore and other parts of the world. I have great pleasure in welcoming all of you to the Global Law School Summit. We are now entering into the first keynote address of the summit on the theme, The Future of Business Law in India. This keynote address will be delivered by Mr. Mohit Saraf, founder and managing partner, Saraf and Partners in India. As some of you know, Mr. Saraf is a very distinguished lawyer and a leading partner of a major law firm. His areas of expertise include private equity and venture capital, mergers and acquisitions, restructuring and insolvency, and projects and energy. Mr. Saraf has vast and rich experience in these areas. He has advised major global and Indian companies and several large institutional clients such as global fund houses, sovereign funds, pension houses, and hedge funds. Mr. Saraf has also worked closely with large domestic and international banks and lending houses. He has extensive experience of nearly 3 decades and has been the corporate practice head at L&L Partners Law Offices, with whom he was associated for more than 26 years and was also instrumental in setting up the firm. He's a member of the National Executive Committee of FICCI and co-chair of the following FICCI committees: Private Equity and Venture Capital Committee, Committee for Corporate Laws, and the Stressed Assets Committee. Mr. Saraf has also conducted numerous training and orientation programs for legal professionals, including most recently a refresher course for commercial court judges organized by the National Judicial Academy in Bhopal, a Government of India training institute primarily for judicial officers, including judges of the High Courts and the Supreme Court. He has also conducted workshops at the National Judicial Academy as the lead speaker on construction and infrastructure contracts organized for the benefit of the judges. He has been awarded with a number of recognitions. Mr. Saraf has also been recognized amongst India's Super 50 lawyers in 2021 by the Asian Legal Business, awarded the M&A Lawyer of the Year award by IFLR 1000 India 2020, and has been recommended as one of Asia's top 25 M&A lawyers. He has been a very dear friend of OP Jindal Global University, Jindal Global Law School since its founding, and we're very delighted that he has accepted our invitation to deliver the keynote address. Over to you, Mr. Saraf.
Thank you so much, Raj Kumar, Dr. Raj Kumar, for inviting me. Absolutely, I'm delighted to be speaking today to all your students. And this is a wonderful global conference. I could only think that only a person of your caliber can organize a 12 hours conference with such variety of speaker and topic. It's unbelievable. I think I've always seen you a go-getter. A conference of this magnitude for 3 days is unbelievable. I would say thank you very much, Dr. Raj Kumar. I would actually talk about a little bit about my era. I went to law school almost 30 years back. And when we passed law, we actually had a very little idea about legal principles. And when we got into profession, we were basically a non-productive lawyers in the first year. We had to understand the principles of law, and we had to also understand and apply those principles of law to the real life situation. What in modern era institutions like OP Jindal and other law schools have done is that this 5-year of training program which you conduct. I feel when I interview people, I feel that they are pretty well-rounded lawyer technically. They understand legal principles pretty well. And I think it is across among the top 5-6 universities in Delhi, in India, where students understand law. And then they go through a lot of internship, and then they understand how to apply law in their current situation. And I think what is very important when I look at these lawyers, I think all these lawyers have raw material to be the top lawyers or top professional in the country. But the only handful of them eventually become top professional. And I thought that I'll talk to the students and share my experience. How do you become a top business lawyer? And what are the key things you need to look at it? And what can institutions like OP Jindal do? I think that's an important part. And I thought that maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. And that will just help you to appreciate the issues. Niroli, if you can put the presentation. So I would just go to the GDP numbers, and I think that's an important part for me. Yeah, I think in 1991, we started with a licensing Raj. And I think most of the students were not even born by 1991. This was the time when we had to mortgage our gold to raise foreign exchange, which we used to pay our oil bills. And that is that bad a situation. And then eventually we came with the licensing Raj, and multiple business policies followed that. But what is important is in 1991, our GDP, our gross domestic product, was around 266 billion, which is basically 0.26 billion trillion. And today, in 2021, we are at $2.8 trillion. So basically from 91 to 2021, in 30 years, our GDP has gone 10 times, from 2.6 to 2.8. And that's an important number to look at it. Today, we are, and I think everybody believes that we can get to $5 trillion in next 5 years. So 2025 to 2027. So basically what we are talking about is what we got in 75 years. We got to $2.8 trillion. We will add $2.2 trillion in next 5 years. And then in next 5-7 years, by 2032-34, we should be at $10 trillion. And I think it's no magic number. We'll get there. We can slip by a year or two, but we'll get there. But this is important. So what I'm trying to really say is that all of you, you all are, I think, under 30 years of age, most lawyers and most students. I would say, if you look at this, you would see how India has changed. And you have seen the GDP going from 0.26 trillion to 2.8 trillion. That is the size you have seen. Now, in next 10 years, when you will start your profession in next 1, 2, 3 years, after that, in 10 years, you will see this 2.8 trillion going to $10 trillion. And what it entails is it will entail a lot of legal complexities. And that is what is more exciting. I think all you lawyers, every day you want very exciting work. And that is what I'm trying to say. The business law today can provide you that excitement, which is very, and again, I'm going to talk to you about really what is there for each one of you to understand. Just to give you an idea, when the GDP grows, and I'm trying to take a little bit away because it's too much of law-centric conference. So I thought I'll bring a little bit of economics also. So give you a different perspective. Because I think sometimes when we don't understand too much of law, we miss the big picture. And I'm trying to get the big picture here. So just 20 years back, 25 years back, to grow GDP by $1, we needed $1.5 trillion, $1.5. That means basically that is the bank credit we needed to grow GDP by $1. Today, because our productivity has increased, like what Raj Kumar is doing a conference across continents, that is how we improve the productivity. Today, we only need a $0.55 to get to additional 1 GDP. Imagine how productive we are. We need to go further down, but we have become that productive. So really what is important is that to grow our economy from $2.8 trillion to $10 trillion, we almost require $5 trillion of investment. And this money will come through equity and will come through debt. And you can imagine the level of IPOs, the level of M&A transaction, the private equity, the infrastructure, which will all happen in next 10 years in front of you. Next, please. So this is a very important thing, and I'll explain to you. Today, if you look at it, apart from certain fundamental rights, if you look at most litigation, most arbitration, most transaction, everything it's centered around business law. And just look at the corporate budget, corporate legal budget today, with the amount of money which corporates in India spend, is almost 38,000 crores in 2020. And I think that there are enough studies to show that when the GDP doubles, like when our GDP will move from $2.8 trillion to $5 trillion in next 5 years, the legal spend will go 3 times. So basically what you're talking about, a 38,000 crore of legal spend will become 1 lakh crore in next 5 years. And then it will become a 2 lakh crore by 2034-35. So what is important is to understand the opportunity and the challenges, because remember, when the GDP is growing, the complexity go many-fold. Next, please. Now, these are some of the business laws. It's important to just get an idea that really, whether it's an IPO market, whether it's a private equity market, whether it's an asset monetization, the government of India is selling assets, whether it's GST, these are all part of commercial laws. Whether, if you remember, the SEBI was set up in 1992, and today in 30 years, we are the fifth largest market in globally as per the market capitalization. So you can imagine the journey, what you have done till now and next 10 years. Next, please. This is just to give you an idea. So all these laws which regulate business, whether it's a Contract Act, Companies Act, whether it's a SEBI law, whether it's a FEMA, FERA, all these things really you can call them and bunch them as part of a business law. And we are going to talk about opportunities, challenges, and basically what we need to do to be the top professional in this market. I would say a lot of these laws are outdated. Like Indians, we still have telephony controlled by Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. You can imagine what was happening in 1885. So a lot of these laws are outdated, and government has removed almost 600 laws from the statute book. They've also modernized a lot of laws. But remember, this is the technology is changing. And I was looking at your schedule. A lot of things you're talking about disruptive technology. And when you're talking about disruptive technology, then the legal process of changing law should be very, very progressive and very fast. Otherwise, regulations are behind the curve. And that is an important part. Next, please. This is really, I think we need to all understand when we go to law school, and I see a lot of senior lawyers when I deal with them. I think we end up thinking the law by itself is like the end in itself. But really, at the end of the day, what we are really a means. What law gives us is technology or tools like various doctrine, estoppel, equality. These are tools which we get. And what we have to do in business law is use these tools to get to the growth. And I think more important is also to make sure that this growth doesn't come at all cost. It comes with transparency, high quality of governance, no corruption, and equitable distribution. And I think these are important parts and parcel. A lot of time, laws get tested on fundamental rights on these principles. Again, this is again a very important part, particularly in countries like India, where government is a key player in the market, like key stakeholder. If you look at the electricity sector, a large part of it is government owned. And therefore, the regulator mindset has to be very different. They have to not be people controlling. And again, if you control business, you stifle growth. What is important is, and I think I have seen that in last 30 years, that most regulators, I think I worked very closely on drafting of the Electricity Act. For 10, 15 years, I think most regulators wanted to control the growth. But today, I think that is shifting. Regulators have started realizing that they are there for the sector. They need the sector to grow. They need to balance out conflicting interests and regulate the sector. Like if you remember, some of you may have noticed that there was a big IPO, Paytm IPO, and the Paytm IPO got listed. And the offer price, and I think some of you who follow capital market will understand that it got listed at 2,100. So all small investors put money at 2,100. And when the stock got listed, it got listed at 1,300. So there was a 30–40% fall in the price. And I'm telling you, and I looked at it, and then they were interviewing the SEBI chairman, who's a top regulator in the capital market side. And you know what he said? And that shows the maturity of our regulators, which is moving. He says, our job is not to focus on valuation. Our job is to focus on disclosure. Market has to decide at what price they need to offer. That would have never been the case 10 years back. If you remember, Facebook got listed in the US, and similar thing to Paytm happened. And I remember that SEC in the US gave notice to merchant bankers on the valuation. So I would say that regulators, the stock market regulator, the SEBI, is understanding these issues, and they're focusing on it. Because remember, first 10 years, I would say the first 10–15 years from 2091 to 2015, the Indian stock market regulator was really like was looking at focusing only on retail investors' interest. Never thought about all other issues. And that is what is changing. And that is, we are giving full information, education, and let people make choices. And that's a very, very positive thing. If you look at the other side, I think most of you must have flown Jet Airways in your life. And today the Jet Airways doesn't exist. And I want to talk a little bit about that deal so that you understand that what are the opportunities, whether you are a lawyer, whether you are a judge, whether you are a professor at law school, whether you are a jurist, the business law, the opportunity exists is humongous. Because if you look at Jet Etihad deal, Etihad had 24% interest in Jet Airways. The company was not able to service the debt. So the Etihad said, we are ready to fund the company. But there is something called pricing guideline. 26-week pricing has to be there. And the company was bankrupt. And they said, we cannot put money at this price. We can put money at a lower price. And SEBI had a right and had a right to do that. But SEBI refused to change the rules. And therefore today, Jet Airways is history. So what I'm trying to explain to you, how things are changing. And whether you are a lawyer or a judge or a regulator, unless you understand business, unless you are able to understand the issue, because you know the tools, you know equality, you know the reasons on what ground can there be discrimination. But if you do not appreciate how the business is done, you will always come to an absurd consequence. And that was the Jet Etihad deal. Next, please. Now, if you see today, we all understand we need money to grow this economy. We are a pretty poor country for all purposes. Now, just sit in the ease of doing ranking, which the World Bank does. Out of 180 countries in 2014, we were ranked at the bottom 50. We were 142. That means basically we were not inviting investors to invest into this country. That is what it really means. And in 6 years, we have moved to 63, which is not a small joke, moving from 142 to 63, because I was a maths graduate and I remember everything is a zero-sum game. So if you are improving the ease of doing business, bureaucrats are losing their power. And that's an important challenge. So this is a very, very important structure to understand, that we have moved from 142 to 63, but still we are not the top 10–20. Today, if we want to invite investment, remember I said to get to a $10 trillion, we need almost a $5–6 trillion of investment. With a ranking at 63, can we get there? The answer is itself a challenge. And therefore, what business law in India provides, really what you have seen in India in the last 75 years is just a tip of an iceberg. Next 10–20 years are going to be crazy. And the crazy part will only happen if you only think like a lawyer. You will only, because if you only think about technical principles, you will get to absurd results. And therefore, what is important is for institutions like OP Jindal to train lawyers, train students and make them understand a little bit of policy, like what I'm talking right now. Raj Kumar, I did a training program for High Court judges, sitting High Court judges for National Judicial Academy. And I made a statement that if you look at all business guys, look at IRRs. And I said, if you are an Indian litigant and you are dishonest, if you don't want to pay people money, then you will make more money by litigating. And I ran the maths, and I'll explain you the maths. And that is an important thing, that the whole business law will change dramatically. Because eventually, you remember, we have to get, in 1980, India's per capita income was higher than China. And today, China is at $10,000 and we are at $20,000, $2,000, sorry. So we are 1/5 of China. And therefore, this shift will happen in front of you. And that is the reason why I feel that what you're going to see next 10, 20 years on business law is going to be unbelievable. A lot of your students at the age of 20, 35, they'll be the leaders in this country. And that is an important part, because really that feudal setup that you can only be a legal luminary at the age of 60 is all getting out of fashion. As long as you read, Raj Kumar, you remember I had a litigation with my erstwhile partner. On the final agreement, final argument, and Abhishek Singhvi was arguing, I got a 10-year-old lawyer from National Law School who is to be my associate to argue. And that is what is important, and he got the relief. So this is what the exciting is, that you don't need gray hairs. As long as you're hardworking, you're technically good, which most your students are, but you understand, you interpret law as the law ought to be, in a business-like fashion, not against business principles. Next, please. Now just look at this structure. Now today, we, among the nation, among 180 nation, starting a business, starting a law firm, starting a law school, I'm sure Raj Kumar would tell you about starting a law school was not an easy job. We rank at 136 in the first, 136 out of 180 countries. That means we are bottom 50. So starting a business is very difficult. Is that an opportunity for lawyers, business lawyers? Yes. If you look at minority protection, we were actually number 4 in the world. On everything else, we are very bad, but on minority rights, we're very good, because we have rights in our SEBI regulations, in Companies Act, on related party transaction, we all have rights. But these rights have a challenge in itself. If you may have followed the entire Z versus Infesco saga. Under the SEBI regulations, which is basically the regulation which governs the listed company, if you are a 10% shareholder, you have a right to call the EGM. It's like a general body meeting, where you can express what you want. And the decision of the EGM will be by majority. Now, right now, Z is refusing even to honor a shareholder right. And that is an interesting part. And what is important is that these type of issues will happen. But that is what will make your life very interesting, because every day there'll be new disputes and new issues. And you need to understand that we have to get much better on all these factors. On enforcing a contract, you can imagine today, we train our kids and everybody to be a good lawyer. You write very good contract. And on enforcing contract, we are at 163 out of 180 countries. So bottom 20. So therefore, I think this is a very important part. And I think I was involved with drafting a judicial reform paper from the Prime Minister on behalf of FICCI. And I worked very closely with Justice Lokur and Justice Sikri. And we presented the paper. I saw that Justice Sikri is actually going to be speaking at this conference as well. And that paper was presented to the Prime Minister. And we made some very strong recommendation how to improve the enforcement of contract. And again, the same issue, that we can't get to $10 trillion if our judicial system does not work. Same thing on the insolvency. And today, if you remember, we moved from 143 to 63 in a matter of 5 years, 6 years. It was largely because of IBC law. And that's an interesting thing. And again, here also you'll see that very clearly, but if you remember, if some of you may recall, the Raghuram Rajan had once said that in India, most of the insolvencies are induced by promoters. And therefore, there was a policy issue which was thought that promoters of a stressed company will not be permitted to take the company back. And then I was representing the ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel when they were taking over the SR Steel. It took almost 500 days for NCLT Ahmedabad to listen to the petition of the exiting promoter. So what is important is a lot of these things. Why do judges do what they do? You know why? Because they understand the tools of natural justice, but they don't understand the business side of it. They don't understand why was the IBC law brought in. There was a stress in the banking system. And what we are trying to talk about here is that along with the tools which Raj Kumar and the team is teaching you, if you build the business side of it, I think sky's the limit. And you guys can get to a level which people have not reached there at the age of 55, 60. Next, please. Just look at this thing that right now, if you look at India, all these young 35, 34-year-old boys, they're setting up company and unicorn. And you know what they're doing? And that's an important part. It's very important for you to see. They are coming without a baggage. They see this is how they can make business. And you know what they do? They don't even go to the lawyers. And that's an important part. And I've seen that. They said, yeah, every guy will tell me that this doesn't work, that doesn't work. So what we do is we build a business model. And the only thing we look at it is that can we get behind the bars? If they can't get, because most laws do not stop you because they allow you certain areas and rest they don't. So people take advantage of the regulatory arbitrage and set up businesses. So when Uber was set up, you know, you remember the old days that every place you had a taxi, like if you go to Goa, you can't hire a taxi from any other area. You have to get a taxi from that area because they had the local connection. Now, how do you make Uber run? Because you have taxi permits and things like that. So what they did was they basically picked up the models from the outside and they started looking at it. What does the regulators stop you? And they kept doing it. And suddenly this gig economy became too big. And then public good came in. It was giving so much of job. Remember, the government was not able to create job. And everybody started liking gig economy because it was giving options to consumers and it was giving jobs. And then it got legalized. So what I'm trying to say is most new businesses are ahead of technology, ahead of legislative framework. Like crypto, now we are talking about in parliament and know what is happening in India. So what is important is that this is a great opportunity. Here, a lawyer who's technically good can always push the envelope. And that is what the value would be. And this is again an important, and I would recommend Mr. Kumar to call some of these unicorn promoters because it's very important for students to understand how business is done. Because I've seen when I speak with my partners and when businessmen tell their problem, they don't give respect because they just believe, what is this? We're not interested. We only understand our estoppel issues, jurisprudence issues. We don't talk about all these issues because it's below our dignity. And that is an important part. And this is what is important to relate to the business. Because I remember at once, there was one person who was the biggest insider trading in the US. He was appointed the chairman of SEC. And that then president was put on the camera and said, why did you appoint this man? He said, you need a thief to catch a thief. And that is an important part, that you need to understand business to be an advisor, to give effective advice. Jack Welch used to run GE. And I met Jack Welch. Used to come regularly to India and I did a lot of work with him. I was telling him, I said, Jack, you must have some certain core lawyers who you trust. What are the reasons? What do you look at a lawyer? He said, I want a lawyer who can tell me what to do and how to do, not a lawyer who can tell me it cannot be done. And again, it doesn't mean that you do unethical issues, but you have to be creative. Firstly, you have to relate to what the business wants. Next, please. So if you remember in last year, we virtually had no unicorn 2 years back. Today we have 21, and it is expected that we'll have over 100 unicorn in next 5 years. And that will show you the ecosystem. And therefore, you need to be relevant in this ecosystem. Most senior lawyers are not relevant. And that is a great opportunity, Raj, for your students, that understand business, push the envelope, and think about creativity. This is again an important part about preparing for the future, that every time you have to think about growth, governance, transparency, like you remember the part of ESG, environment, social, and governance. And you have to look at cross-jurisdictional experience. Because I remember I was involved in the drafting of the Electricity Act for the government of India. And we worked a lot trying to pick the best cases in Latin America and implement in India. And I think this is what a law school can do. And remember, in India, policy makers, they don't have really a staff to help them understand these issues. A law school can do that. And if you build your teams across and you give special marks to them, give them, somebody's working on the infrastructure law, somebody's working on the highway law, somebody's working on the SEBI, you make groups and you bring the best practices globally, I think you will be able to do a lot of service, and you will make your lawyers think like a policymakers. And they will become, whether they are arguing counsel before the Supreme Court or a transaction lawyer, I would say they'll do an excellent job. Next, please. This is very important. Again, I will tell you, if you look at India, the biggest problem in India is laws are drafted by lawyers or bureaucrats who seldom understand business. Business law, I'm talking about business law. They are drafted by people who seldom understand business. Then it is also argued by people like us who seldom understand business. And then it gets adjudicated who seldom understand. And therefore, there is a chaos all the time. If you think about it, any country, we are a common law country. Today, any item which goes to a high court or a Supreme Court, you cannot be sure what the outcome will be. In a common law country, I think it should be almost like you put the story and the output is there. You almost are sure about the output because there's so much of subjectivity, because the laws are poorly drafted and poorly argued and poorly adjudicated. And that is where I feel that business law provides that opportunity to each one of you to do very well in a very short time. In my paper to the Prime Minister, we had suggested, and I'm sure Raj and the institution will have a very different view on that. And again, it is against the separation of power, the whole doctrine of separation of power in India. Because remember, I was saying that really, if you look at the legislations, most economic legislations are good for people because this will help them to move from $2,000 to $10,000 per capita. But most legislation, whether it's an IBC, whether it's a RERA, whether it's GST, gets litigated for a long time. And therefore, there is an important requirement. And we did go right to the Prime Minister's office and said that what you require is you need to have an official body of consultation between the judges, the Supreme, it should be led by the Chief Justice of India and the Prime Minister, where the government should put out the plans that this is what we want to achieve economically. This is what we require. And there should be a discussion. Because remember, if you look at his 5 years back, Raghuram Rajan came up with an NPA policy. It got heavily litigated. And after 2 years of litigation, Supreme Court said it's not legal to be a valid law. And that is what takes the country behind. And this is a very important part as an institution also. I think you should think about it. Particularly, we are not talking about fundamental rights. We are only talking about economic policy. Because remember, there was a change in the Specific Relief Act, where the government realized that most of the infrastructure projects are getting delayed. And remember, under common law, the damages are the most appropriate remedy. Only under specific situation, you can ask for specific relief as specific performance. And there was an amendment to a Specific Relief Act where it said in case of infrastructure project, specific performance should be the rule. Damages should be an exception, because infrastructure projects affect millions of people and help their productivity going up. And therefore, no infrastructure project should be stopped. And that is a very important part. And when I was taking a session for High Court judges, most High Court judges were not clear why this law was brought in, because they felt it was against the common law principle. And when I gave them the thought process, then they could understand the issues. And what is important, it's not that we should be doing this. The government should give this case study. Government should be telling, and it should be a formal, because again, we are not saying that take that ability to strike down the law. But I think the left arm should know what the right arm is doing, and the right arm should guide in that process. And I think there's a lot of things which is required for business law to become more predictable in this country. I think if you remember Vodafone and everything, India is highly unpredictable regulations. And unless lawyers and judges and students understand the business side, they will always come up with crazy conclusions. Next, please. So this is really the important part. Judicial reform, you have to really have a lot of judges, you have to have infrastructure, you have to remove the backlog, you have to have a better case management studies, the case management system, technology. We also said that actually lawyers are not good at managing businesses. So therefore the court system should actually be given out to a CTO, a chief technology officer, should not be with the chief justice, because he can manage case, but let him not manage the system, because that can be done very effectively by technology player. And this is a very important part. I think all these things, we can't fix the backlogs in India. If you can't fix backlog, we will always be missing the $10 trillion. And therefore the business law to that extent will always be a challenge. And what is more important, and I think this is again an important part for you guys to think about, is that under the Indian Contract Act, you get damages, what is provided as a reasonable and probable consequences of damage, of breach. If damages will be reasonable and probable consequences, then there will be never an incentive to abide by the contract. It has to be the consequential effect. Because really at the end of the day, when I work with large corporate, when they have a case outside India, they get worried. When they have a case in India, they're not worried. Because here you don't end up paying the damages. And that's the reason the Section 73 is one of the big reasons why we have such a huge litigant backlogs in India, because it makes sense for people. And again, I'll give you an example, what I gave it to the judges, that if you have 100 crore to pay to somebody, and if you're litigating, as per the World Bank, it takes 4.25 years to get settled at the first local level, whether it's a high court or a lower level. So really, at the end of the day, you don't have to pay for 4.25 years. And the typical rate of interest is 12%. So in 4 years, you virtually saved 60 crore rupees of interest by not paying in time. So really, if you eventually have to pay, and if the court can award 200 crores damages to you because you made money on that interest, then there will be interest. But if you have to pay 8% or 6% or 2%, I think there will be no benefit for anybody to litigate. And therefore, India often is, again, what is important is all these things, in my view, will change dramatically. Enforcement of contract, predictability of regulators, predictability of judges, predictability of legal system. And therefore, what I'm trying to say is in next 10, 12 years, are going to be crazy and opportunity where each one of you can actually really build a name and position as a legal luminary, and provided you understand that law only provides us a tool, and therefore we need to understand cross-culture issues. We need to understand how that part of the business is regulated in different parts of the world, and pick the best practices and focus on it. Next, please. I think this is important, what schools can offer, particularly OP Jindal's school or similar schools, in interdisciplinary approach. Very, very important that you make people sit and think together. And because just law, because really at the end of the day, when anybody comes to us, it's always a commercial dispute. If you do not understand what the issue, what the main reason for the dispute is, if you don't focus on that, if you don't understand what does he really want, you can never be a trusted advisor to your client. And therefore, this is a very, very important part. Then the second important part is to understand business. I think you guys need to read a lot of Economic Times. You need to get a lot of people to talk about business, how they started their business, what are the challenges, what were the challenges they faced in law, how did they overcome. That is an important part. You need to get a lot of people on economic policies, like advisors, economic policy thinking people who will tell you how the GDP will move, how the economic policies are being decided, because these part of it are so important to be a lawyer of relevance in 2020s. Because you could have just done the fundamental right and constitutional issues earlier in 20 years back. But today, you have to bring those principles of constitution and overplay with the business law. Next, please. This is again very important, that build specialization. I think I understand your classes, you have elective courses on specialization. And I think you should bring more cross-border, understand what are the problems which people face in different parts of the world, whether it's a competition issue, whether it's a road issue, whether it's a port issue, and bring that example and make a case study. Because I think right now, if a lot of these things are done by an educational institution, it will be more receptive by the government and receptive by decision makers. When it is done by lawyers, because remember, in most countries, you have lobby rules. In India, you don't have. So you can be actually working for somebody and giving a wrong advice or giving a motivated advice. And therefore, I would say institutions of your stature can play a bigger role. Also, I would say that you can play a very large role in capacity building, training, and getting judges, lawyers, students to have an interactive session and where they can think about it. Because really at the end of the day, everybody needs to understand what this particular law needs to regulate. If you miss that part, you will always be at risk because your conclusions will not be really appropriate. I think, Dr. Raj Kumar, with that, I come to an end of the session. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mohit. Thank you very much for a fascinating and comprehensive and really a tour de force on the evolution of business law and also its future. We've already got a number of questions from our audience. So I'm going to quickly start shooting it at you. The first question is that we have 15 minutes, so let's move forward. Could you comment on the future implications of the gig economy on the conception of employment? How should the law regulate this economy for the labor force it employs?
A few years back, when I was working with gig economy players, I think most players wanted to give insurance protection to the employees. And we had a long chat with the government. And the government was very confused. The government said, if we actually allow you to do that, then virtually we are allowing you to have casual labor. And who were the people who were affected? The laborers never got a protection because the government could not get out of it. So I would say today in 2021, particularly, I think that if you look at the numbers, the government has failed to create job opportunities, and which is right so, because government is getting out of business. But gig economy has supported a huge amount of job creation. And today, I think everybody understands that gig economy, casual laborers, optional laborers are actually an in thing, and they need to be protected. And that has changed dramatically. And I think we required changes in the labor law as well. But I think right now the advantage of protection, the companies are able to buy insurance packages, cover them for accident, particularly I think Zomato, people who want to deliver food at your place, they are now covered. So I think things have happened, but I think they need to be much better. But again, remember, the problem in India is that once the regulator understand this is to be protected, then they will try to tell you that you become as if you are a permanent employee. You can't, because then the business model doesn't support you. The business model
supports. Thank you, Mohit, for that.
Yes.
Thank you, Mohit. It's a very interesting question, which I think then similar themed questions have come from more people who attended this. Even after improvement in ease of doing business ranking of India, there is still lack of foreign international businesses wanting to establish India as the base. There's possibly a lack of trust and even regulatory uncertainty. What can be the possible policy changes that will facilitate this bridging the gap between the foreign investors' intention and what ends up happening in India?
Remember, I said we have improved on ease of doing business. We were at 143 out of 180. Today we are 63. So that means 62 countries are better than us. So remember one thing, if we have 62 betters, then we have to always be on the receiving end of the 62. And that is what it is. So really it has improved. We need to, because if we need a $5 trillion of investment in next 10 years, we need to be in the top 20. Unless we are in the top 20, those challenges will always be there. The other important thing is what I mentioned, that on the enforcement of contract, really at the end of the day, any investor who comes to India, what does he have? He has a contract with a supplier contract or a joint venture contract. If we are at 163 out of 180, you can imagine the contract is not worth the paper which is written on. So unless those things are changed, unless the regulatory behavior is changed, unless everybody tomorrow, if somebody comes to Raj Kumar and says, this is a problem we are having, and Raj should say, no worries, this is what the Supreme Court will decide. That is what we cannot do, because I think tools everybody knows, but application of tool is subjectivity. And that is why the challenge is there. But we are making good progress. I would say we are making very good progress. In last 2-3 years, we have made a lot of progress, but still Delhi bahut dur hai.
Thank you, Mohit, for that. There's another question about the digital technologies and their dependence on regulation. In today's times, businesses dependent on digital technologies are being severely impacted with new regulations and even possible national level policy protection. How do you envisage the change happening in this area, particularly when there are at times contradictory signaling that comes even from the government?
Remember one thing, this is a standard global practice. So we should not get too worried about it. If you see today, what is being done in China is the same issue. In India, we're talking about a data localization. In China, they are also doing the similar stuff. So I would say this is a global issue, that there is a lot of nationalism right now, pseudo-nationalism, everybody trying to be self-independent, and that has its own impact. But really at the end of the day, what is important is that what I've seen in last 10 years is that a lot of business models are coming up. If business model generally affect and benefit consumers and create large economy, a large support system, large employees, those type of businesses are seldom stopped, because there is an inner, I would say, reason to let the business continue. Uber, Zomato, Swiggy is examples of that. But if you have something like a cryptocurrency, which does not really affect a man on the street. There is no reason typically a sovereign will give up its right to control currency. So that is again an issue. But again, I'm not suggesting that it is right, but I would say the inertia to get for government to be more realistic is lacking in a cryptocurrency because it's not affecting common people, but it's not there in Uber.
Thank you, Mohit. There are several questions. I'm going to pick up a few more. We have another 5-6 minutes. There is a very interesting question about the dilemma which many young law graduates face when it comes to wanting to join a law firm or even trying to become an entrepreneur in the field of law. Sometimes some of them may not have the luxury of choices, but as an accomplished professional who has both been working in a law firm and then starting one on your own, what are your reflections? What is your advice?
I would say lawyers, I've co-founded Luthra & Luthra, almost as a two-lawyer way back in 90s. And from there, we built up to 350 lawyers. And now I founded Saraf and Partners. Now we are 150 of us, 160 of us in a matter of 5 months. So I would say this journey to create something good is very exciting and everybody should try. But again, it's important to understand when to do it. I think at the end of the day, if you have fair amount of understanding about business and law and how it is used, then you can be more successful. If you do it maybe too early in the game, unless you got a new idea, like I was reading an article in the newspaper about a young boy from a law school who set up a new business model to fund litigation. Now, how it is doing and what are the regulatory challenges and things like that. If you are doing something like that, I would say there's never a right time, Raj Kumar. You have to run it. People like you and me can obviously guide people. But again, at the end of the day, we have to all understand, none of these things can be achieved as a pastime. You have to be 100% thinking about it, dedicated. You have to have hunger in your belly. And every person who succeeded in life has failed many times before he succeeds. As long as work becomes your passion, you enjoy what you do, I think the chances of you failing in this country is very limited, because I would say there's nothing really. The institution, we are at $2.8 trillion, we get to $10 trillion. Hundreds of things will happen in next 5-10 years. And therefore, if you are at the right time, right place, and you have a hunger, and you are not ego, you don't have an ego. You don't think, you give, even if your first year associate, if he comes up with a good idea, you listen to him and give full weightage. I think that's how institutions are built.
Thank you, Mohit. That's fantastic, really inspiring. There's another very interesting question about, in terms of the evolution of commercial legal practice, and you mentioned about litigation. The questioner is asking that, the reality is litigation creates disincentives for businesses. But at the same time, unfortunately, dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution, be it arbitration, mediation, conciliation, never really, achieved its fullest potential in India. What would you attribute to as the main reasons for its, to a large extent, disappointment, and what can we do to turn around?
I would say even arbitration and alternate dispute mechanism actually have a long way to go in India. I tell you why. And I have been also always, I did all my contracts all my life thinking arbitration will get sorted out and that's the best way to go. I think when the matter is in front of public, everybody's more careful. When the matter goes behind the closed door, even if it's done by Supreme Court judges, the matter becomes more relaxed. So I think that's an important part. I think right now, the focus, the lack, there is a lot of lack of seriousness, I would say. Because if you remember, lawyers in India take way too many briefs and seldom do justice to the brief. And if it is a part of an informal process, then the justice is very limited. So I would say a lot of corporates in India started thinking about is that these informal processes doesn't work. And even arbitration in India sometimes doesn't work because the seriousness is often lacking. And public glare, though it's difficult, and sometimes issues of confidential issues are in the middle of the court, but it helps you to resolve it quicker. So I would say a lot of institutional thinking is required both for lawyers and judges and retired judges and arbitrators, and seriousness to get to succeed this. Because I would say I've seen enough in last few years that generally people are more relaxed when it's a private discussion.
Well, that's fantastic. We have a few minutes. There's another very good question, which I feel needs to be answered. When do you think, I mean, if you look at the corporate law firms in US and UK and other major organizations, old firms, be it, Sullivan and Cromwell or Skadden Arps or White and Case or other type of firms, there was a point of time clearly when it became institutionalized and transcended the family-run idea of a firm. Do you see that happening in India at some point of time? Because frankly, in the world of corporations in India, we have not gone in that direction. And there is a very strong case even now made that there is something valuable about it still being quote unquote family run or family business. But do you think in professional firms such as organizations such as law firms, such a possibility exists in the future?
I think if you look at Saraf and Partners, let's look at this firm which has been born 5 months before. I and Rajiv were partners in the old firm. I was a 33% owner and Rajiv was 66% owner. And that firm disintegrated because we refused to give equity to our young partners. Today, when I formed this new firm, the 100% of liability is with me. But my ownership, I have capped it at 33%. I have distributed 33% of equity to my 28 partners. And I kept 33% in escrow for future partners. So I would say right now, this will be the first firm which virtually I'll start as a minority partner. And I would say remember when the markets are not expanding, you can do whatever and you can get away. But if you remember in 2002 to 2010, when Indian market expanded, a lot of old Mumbai-based firms disintegrated. I would say next 20 years, a lot of Indian firms will get disintegrated because unless you build a fair structure where people who are working hard are benefiting, they are benefiting both as owners, as say in the management, as an equity player. I think institution building will never be this. I think what has really happened is that everybody has been thinking about and talking about institution building, but protecting the freedom and trying to say that, okay, this is something which we cannot. And I think at the end of the day, Indian legal system, law firms are all feudal systems. I would say if you look at our entire judges, Supreme Court, High Court, senior judges, lawyers, we are a very feudalistic society, though we call ourselves a democracy. And I think that runs across in law firms. But I would say next 5-10 years, there'll be more changes like that, which Saraf and Partners offered, and other firms will also do. And I think in my view, a lot of good firms will evolve. Eventually, you remember, often a crisis creates these institutions. If everybody at a time, then probably you'll keep postponing it. But I think the time is right because economy will expand in next 10, 15 years in a crazy manner. And for people to keep their lawyers, high performing lawyers, unless they reinvent themselves, it will be very difficult.
Well, Mohit, let me move to my last question. That's from me. Now, you gave a fascinating lecture and indeed spoke about the future of business laws. One of the remarkable things that I saw both in the US and UK is major partners of law firms spending a fair amount of time in law schools and universities, teaching full-fledged courses and inspiring young people. The tragedy of India and Indian law schools, and I dare say Indian corporate legal bar, including lawyers and judges, is very few people are prepared to make that commitment to the next generation. I'm not talking about these occasional lectures, but I'm talking about a serious commitment to offer courses. When do you think we can create a culture whereby we can build the next generation of talent by distinguished partners and managing partners and senior counsels and others to give a bit of their time to the next generation of lawyers?
Yeah, I would say it's a very, very appropriate question. And I think in my view, that is a requirement. And that is how you will build capacity going forward. And there's no question that it cannot be done. I think all these things, there's a possibility of doing it. But remember one thing, what has really happened in India, and where I see sometimes a lot of people are not able to do it, is because law firms typically are known for 2, 5, 6 young lawyers, or old lawyers like me, very few lawyers. And those people are often, even if they don't add any value, they need to be part of every discussion. And that is where the challenge is. But having said that, I would say the biggest challenge for people was travel and giving lectures. I would say that technology, that has changed, because really at the end of the day, because if you end up spending half a day, then it's a big challenge. But I would say if you're spending 1 hour a part of your program, but again, Raj, I think whatever said and done, it's not just 1 hour. I think if you have to do, even if I have to do a matter, I have to spend a lot of time. And I think the problem is the time. And I would say a lot of people are not able to do that, because today people are they're overbriefed. In next 10 years, I would say the lawyers will not be overbriefed, because you will have so many, because remember, corporate lawyers are all 30 years old. There's no corporate law before that. And most of us are all 10, 20, and there are a handful of people like us. So I would say that I'm quite expecting the next 10 years, you will have hundreds of us like us in this market. And once that happens, the pressure will ease off. But that doesn't mean that we are saying that we will do it after 10 years. I think we should all take up a job and give back to society, give back to a law school, because we need to make sure people who graduate can come up a little sharper. And it's not that they're less sharper, but they need to get the perspective. Like I tell you one thing, in my earlier firm, Raj, when the whole lockdown happened, I took an initiative and I conducted 40 training programs in that lockdown period for all my law school, all my young associates. So that time, we all had too much of time. Now nobody has time. So I would say we have to find time. These are important things. The way people have given a lot of their wealth away, this is something which people have to do it as a part of their DNA.
Thank you very much, Mohit, for a fascinating keynote address on the future of business law in India. I am deeply grateful to you for taking time out from your busy schedule and to also patiently answer the questions in a candid and reflective manner.